Hello and welcome to a review of Darwinia, a book by Robert Charles Wilson, winner of the Philip K. Dick Award and the Hugo Award finalist. I do believe it won a few more awards out there, out and about. It is a book from 1998. I've had this book on my shelf a while. I didn't review it before picking it up. I did a bit of reading on its background before I put it on the shelf, but not since then. Okay, but it's got this beautiful cover that I feel is somewhat reminiscent of the Ballard's Drowned World, and it wraps around. So you've got a old school sail ship, and it's in this lush tropical environment. And then as we wind around the spine, the vegetation looks weirder and wilder and less familiar, I guess is the word. And this beautiful cover art was done by Jim Burns, I think it is. Yes, Jim Burns. Excellent job. I've just finished it. It's a good book. I can see why it won awards. I didn't love it entirely. But let's talk a little bit about it. This is a quick and dirty review since I haven't really done much research on it. What I essentially thought this was about exploring a new continent where Europe used to be, that has mysteriously vanished. I thought this was going to be heavy on the ecology. And I've had reasons to believe it. There are some of the reasons right there. In my estimation, that is not what this book is about. This is basically a very thinly disguised Christian good versus evil fight, God against demons, whatever. Anyway, that's my personal opinion. It may not be a popular opinion, but I really think that as an SF novel, this is basically a theology fantasy novel. So, no spoilers for the first bit. We start in a prologue in 1912, where we're introduced to our primary protagonist throughout the novel. Guilford Law is 14, and it is actually his 14th birthday when these mysterious lights appear in the sky. And he feels an association with those lights because it's his 14th birthday, even though he's old enough to know that they're nothing to do with them. So he's over in Boston, he watches them appear, and then we find more about these lights from different vantage points, starting with a sea captain who's on a coal steamer on his way from America to Ireland. In Ireland, he's due to dock in a well-known dock, but when he arrives there, he finds that the docks aren't present. No humanity is present. It's as if humanity has never been. But worse than that, it's not even the world that would be if humanity and all his works were just removed from it. It's a wild world with vegetation and animals, completely unlike the world as we know it. And we get little points from other places around the world also identifying this bite that's been taken essentially out of Europe, without affecting the rest of the world. And it's a really good introduction, and I was there for that. Now, our first chapter, or book one, is in 1920, when Guilford Law is now an adult. He's a professional photographer. He's a husband, and with his wife Carolyn and his 2-year-old daughter Lily. He has been offered the position of official photographer on the Finch expedition, which is going to explore Darwinia as the new continent has become known. So him and Carolyn and Lily all go across to London. Carolyn has insisted on this, even though London doesn't really exist. It's New London now, and it's being rebuilt by someone who apparently died in World War One. And I feel like if I knew who that person was, I might be more interested in the things that he's achieving in this world, but I'd never heard of him and I couldn't be bothered to stop to Google. So it's this whole feeling that the author knew someone from history, Lord Salisbury? No, I don't think so. Who was really interesting, and he's imagining him trying to reinvent England. and rebuild London. So at this point, there's this interesting effect of London is this crude frontier city built on a muddy river, just struggling to make its pathway. So you've got this reversal. This used to be the old world and America the new world, only now America's the old world and England is the new world. Carolyn's insisted on travelling to London, staying there while her husband's on the Finch expedition, but she doesn't like it very much and she whines a lot. I didn't really like her and I didn't enjoy her part in the proceeds. Guildford Law isn't bad, he's interesting enough, but at this point we also have an awful lot of vantage points. In that first book we've got Vale, who's some sort of mystic in America, only we find out that this is a mystic who really can talk to the dead and really can predict the future, because he's got some weird beetle god in his head telling him this information. And we've got a few other characters. There's way too many characters for me in book one. I couldn't really bond to any of them. I didn't really get any of them. And yet the early part of the book where it explores the concept of the appearance of Darwinia is actually the best part of this book for me. Okay, so Guildford sets off with the team and they travel across the channel to, I guess, where maybe Paris would be. Not sure about that. And they collect various people and various things and they start traveling up the Rhine. The idea is to travel up the Rhine, investigate the scientific elements of the continent on the way and possibly find a way across the Alps. So they're looking to see if this topography matches the topography of old Earth, and of course there's money involved. If this matches the topography of old Earth, we'll know where there's certain precious resources, for example. There's a lot of scientists in this expedition, none of whom are well outlined. There's an outdoorsman who comes with them. He's, at least I remember his name, it's Tom. There's the leader of the expedition, Finch, who is a deeply, deeply Christian religious guy who thinks it's all going to prove that the flood was real and the world has been shaped by the flood. And the religious elements are calling this metamorphosis of Europe the miracle. There's also Sullivan. Sullivan is some other kind of scientist. I think he was a botanist. And he is more evolutionary based, and he keeps throwing out suggestions to Guildford about how could these bones be that old if this continent is really only a few years old, etc., etc. So right here we've got a lot of religion happening, and as one person whose review I read online pointed out, the early 1900s were America was in the grip of a fundamentalist Christian attitude, and if something like this had happened, it probably would have been regarded as a miracle. So this overt Christianity evolution versus floodism or whatever is probably an attempt to build a historic feel. I don't think it works. I read a lot of historic fiction and non-fiction, modern, not modern. I struggled to accept this as the early 1900s. But, I mean, really, that's okay. So, okay, we are in the 1920s. You've got all these different characters in different parts of the world who have these tiny little chapters each, distracting me. I don't love this skipping around all that much at the best of times. This wasn't the best of times. It meant that I failed to actually connect to any of the characters. And, well, I never doubted which narrative I was involved in. I doubted whether I cared. I deeply, profoundly didn't care what was happening to Vale. I deeply, profoundly didn't like or care what was happening to Carolyn. I was deeply and profoundly disappointed in what was happening to Guildford. So, essentially, we have far, far too many characters early on with far, far too little reason to care about any of them. and exceptionally little ecology. Now, considering what we know about this book, how it's been presented, I don't think it's unreasonable of me to expect that ecology would be a large theme, but it isn't. Despite the Finch group being a group, they're all practically all of them are scientists. There's botanists, there's geologists, there's entomologists, there's all the ologists. But for all of that, Robert Charles Wilson never spends 5 or 6 minutes to create an ecology. He's got 5 or 6 species that he talks about every now and then, like the sage pine and the mosk tree, something like that. And he's got 3 or 4 different types of animals that come up again and again as well. His writing is beautiful. It's literary, far more so than the books I've been reading recently. It's evocative. And I think in that early book 1, he does once or twice try and give us a sense of feeling of how this new continent looks, which didn't work for me. Now, apparently this book was written in parts only in Canada and North America, and it failed to ever capture any spirit of Europe, real or alternate, for me. It only ever came across... The most evocative part is where Guilford Law, one of the others in the ology team, stand there and go, oh, this reminds me of the Rockies a bit. It's like, really? Okay. Anyway, that's what we've got. So, we've got overt religious stuff happening everywhere. We've got a lot of events that should be fun. Now, on the back, this talks about me being in the best tradition of Edgar Rice Burroughs, Jules Verne, and H.G. Wells, a page-turner. That's not something I said. Toronto Globe and McGill wrote that. And Edgar Rice Burroughs and Jules Verne are regularly referenced because Guilford apparently likes reading their adventures. This should be like that, only it isn't. The exploration is actually quite deeply dull. So 1912, history was changed, I'm reading from the back, by the miracle when the old world of Europe was replaced by Darwinia, a strange land of nightmarish jungle and antediluvian monsters, which I would have loved to see. I didn't see many monsters. I wanted those monsters. I feel I was owed those monsters. To some, the miracle is an act of divine retribution. To others, it's an opportunity to carve a new empire. And that brings us to, I don't know, remember if it's book 1 or if it's book 2. Carolyn's in London being annoying. Guilford is on this trip, which isn't turning out as well as they were hoping. In fact, this trip and the characters on it was so ambiguous that I really... It doesn't end well for them. You can find that online. It's only a mild spoiler. The first one who dies, I didn't even know who he was. How do I bond with these characters who I don't know? How do I care what happens to them if I don't know them? It's just... It's not a small book. A book this size, you should have time to build characters, to build some sort of link. So it's 372 pages long. It felt longer. In this early part as well is when a few times I considered DNFing it. I thought I'll put it back on the shelf, I'll get back to it later. The only reason that didn't happen was because I had a long weekend and I knew I had lots of uninterrupted reading time. I could go to the beach, I could get through it. I didn't enjoy coming to this book. I didn't look forward to reading it. I found it dull and annoying because I didn't realize that I was picking up a Christian speculative fiction book. I thought I was picking up an ecological one, and the feeling was very different. Okay, next thing that happens is probably heading in spoilers. So if you think you might read this book, and I know I haven't been selling it, but it is beautifully written, and if you are reading award winners, or if you like Robert Charles Wilson, I've never read anything else by Charles Wilson, don't know if I will. For any of those reasons you think you're going to read this sometime soon, probably stop around about now. I think I've said One more thing. The ending was a religious schmozzle. I see no real point to it. It's basically the most. Just what was that ending? It's like I don't get it. Anyhow, now the whinging really starts. So spoilers in 3, 2, 1. Spoiler. Next thing that happens, well, Finch and Guildford are still wandering around the continent, being shot at by people who may or may not be partisans. This whole political idiocy unfolds, and it is idiotic. America is fighting with England, only England isn't even a real country. America wants to declare all of Darwinia sort of terra nullis, that everyone can repopulate. Of course, the people from Germany and Italy and England who are elsewhere in the world, especially England because there was empire at that stage, want to go back and re-establish their hometowns. America wants everyone, i.e. themselves, to be able to lay claim to it. And at this point, one really gets the sense of how incredibly Anglo-centric, specifically American-centric this is. It's like you might as well think, you would be excused for thinking there's no other country in the world aside from Europe and America. And we know that this circle ends in Russia, but in the volcanic area of Russia, there's plenty more Russia. There's a lot of Asia, Indian subcontinent, Africa, big country, full of people. You'd think some of them would be mildly interested in all this terra nullis. Nope, another one. It's down to England and America. And America starts a war and bombs London, where Carolyn is at the time. And we hear these machinations of this some shonky business of getting the Finch expedition killed in order to have an excuse to go to war with England, who's been granted the exemption to repopulate England. And we, as readers, know that there's some of this shonky business has to do with this weird beetle god that's riding our friendly psychic veil back in America. We don't know exactly what, we find out later. But in no other sense does this war in any way make sense, because any war and most skirmishes in history has one fact. If there is an aggressor, the aggressor has something to gain. That is, if there is any war or skirmish you can think of in the entire history of military anything, tell me about it where the aggressor had nothing to gain. I can't think of a single one, and I used to read a lot of military history. But America has nothing to gain here. In 1920, America wasn't heavily populated. It didn't have the press of citizens needing somewhere to expand to. It had nothing else to gain from fighting across the Atlantic people who weren't even a proper country, and yet that happens. It was deeply weird. And I was deeply unimpressed. So here we are, thoroughly in spoiler territory. We've got an epilogue that happens. Is it an epilogue or an interlude? Interlude happens next. I can't remember if it's the end of book 1 or book 2, but this interlude tells us, wait for it, the sciencey bit. The sciencey bit is that there's all these huge spheres called noospheres all the way through the universe, full of intelligent, hyper intelligent shades of blue or something that have been there since long before humans evolved on Earth, and are there at the end of time, where they're being undermined by the bad guys. The bad guys are called, what are they called? Scions. Okay, and they're corrupting these archives that the new spheres created in order to hoard all of intelligence that's ever been in the universe and keep it safe. Right. So there's a lot of problems with that, and there's a lot of problems with how it's done. So Robert Charles Wilson throws all these phrases around like Turin packets and psi-lifes and angels and demons, and by now my heart is dropping because I'm really not that into angels and demons and good and evil and all that sort of stuff. I don't care if you call them angels and demons or new spheres and Cylons, whatever you're doing, it's if you make something as obviously a battle of good and evil as this book is, you kind of lose me unless you're doing something exotically interesting, and this one wasn't. However, as long as you can escape this religious subtext, it's not a bad speculative fiction book, but it is far, far more religious subtext than it is anything else. And I'm not even that against religious subtext, really. I still love the Narnia books. It's like you can't tell me there's no Christian subtext there. I love them and reread them regularly. But the thing is, I'm not being deceived into reading them by being told it's something else. And I feel that here there is an element of deception happening, because this is pretending to be one thing, which is basically ecological, speculative, alternative history, science fiction, and it's a battle between angels and demons for the good of the world. This dishonesty, by the way, is a key factor in door knockers and God botherers who say, "Isn't nature wonderful?" and use that as an excuse to start talking to you about the Bible. And that's a little bit how I felt about Darwinia. Celestial war is a phrase that gets thrown around a lot. Armageddon appears in the last book, and it's like, oh, just pass the bucket. I was not here for this. This was not what I signed up for. No offense to religious texts or people who enjoy reading about that. I do at times too, but again, I expect to be told that that's what I'm reading in advance. Okay, where do we go after that? Okay, so we've got the 1920s, and Guildford Law is still on Darwinia, and stuff happens. They find this weird city that's obviously manufactured but by whom? It doesn't seem to be humans. And the whole thing ends in a sort of collapsing universe. Guildford Law by now has got another Guildford Law shadowing him. He's a ghost of himself who died in World War II, I'm going to say. No, it must have been one. He died in a world war, but he's also part of these new sphere hyper-intelligent beings that last forever. He's there because Darwinia shouldn't be there. It's only there because the enemy brought it there, and at the end of some book or other, this past Guildford, who's now a ghost and a hyper-intelligent entity, is trying to sign our Guildford, the Guildford Law we know, up to be his agent in some way, and we're not told initially what. I think we can all guess. Guildford says no and walks away. And he walks back to London and he tries to find where his wife and daughter had gone, but they've been told years ago that he died during the whole expedition. So they've gone off to Australia with a new guy. He goes off to the Mediterranean, where they're establishing territories. None of them are the old countries that they're establishing new territories. Anyway, he goes back there, gets married, has a kid, has a happy life. And then Tom, the trapper from the first expedition, catches up with him. And in the meantime, Guildford has not aged at all, and neither has Tom the trapper. They're told that they're now part of the ghosts, and they're part of this angels versus demons fight, whether they like it or not. And once again, Guildford is given the opportunity to join up, which he does. So at the end of this book, I guess it's a spoiler, but you see it coming far, far back. You've got this whole good guys versus bad guys. Now, Vale back in America, who's got this beetle riding him, beetle god who makes him more clairvoyant than he naturally is. And his contemporaries turn into demons or beetles or whatever you want. They become less human. They shuck off their human and become gooey and nasty because they're the bad guys, right? And they made a deal with the bad guy gods. So obviously bad things have got to happen to them. Guilford and Tom and all the good guys who are being ridden by the angels, they all go to meet up at this city, which is like some speculative fiction version of hell, I guess, only it's really linking them to these new sphere science fiction-y places. And there's a battle that was deeply dull, and finally they make it through, and Guilford chooses to live another normal life as a normal human being. And I am so glad to be done with this book. I really, really am. It is beautifully written. I guess for some people it will be deeply insightful. I found it deeply repetitive and not the theme that I was promised in any sense of the word anywhere. And I am bitterly angry at the lack of ecology. You had a whole continent to play with, Wilson, or Charles Wilson, whichever it is. And all you gave me was sage pine trees and wormy beasts that are kind of like yaks with 6 legs. It's even Edgar Rice Burroughs did more ecology than this. And Edgar Rice Burroughs didn't have nearly 400 pages to play with. I didn't like it. Now, how am I going to rate it? Well, all this whining that I've been doing, you're probably thinking it's going to be a 1 or a 2. It actually deserves a 3, simply because even though I considered DNFing it, I never did. I knew I'd never pick it up again, and I had the long weekend to read it in, so I was determined to lie on the beach and finish it, which I did. I finished it. I never resorted to skim reading, except a tiny bit in the deeply dull battle at the end, right at the end. All the rest of this I read word for word, and the writing is beautiful. It's really well done. He can really write. Occasionally he even lapses into moments of descriptiveness where you actually see the scene. So he's not a bad writer. I just found this book deeply unenjoyable. And while there may be people who will claim this is all meant to be some sort of metaphor or exploration of Christianity. What's the phrase someone said? Cosmic themes. That's it. I think it's masquerading as science fiction, trying to explain cosmic themes, but it's not cosmic themes. It is essentially celestial war, apocalypse, demons. It even uses the word demons, and it is me being preached to. Wasn't impressed by that. So 2.5 stars because it's beautifully written, it's well plotted, it's clearly had a lot of time spent on it, and it's well edited. Good construction, great idea. It loses 1 whole half star for lost, wasted, missed idea. I wanted to see that Europe that Darwinia claimed to be, and I never did. I just saw a few worms, a couple of insects, and a big dissertation about how demons look like beetles. 2.5 stars from me. Thank you for watching. Read good books, and maybe even this book, because it is a good book. It's just not a good book for me at all. Thanks for watching. Bye.